So first, let's scroll back up and we'll go ahead and select the head, or again, you can just Alt-Tap in your viewport here. We're going to go into Solo, and now we've got our head. Now, remember when we split this head off, we had already Dynameshed the original body. So if I go in here to our Dynamesh settings, you're going to see the Dynamesh resolution set at 664. Now, if I turn blur down to 0 and we hit Dynamesh again, that will automatically go ahead and fill this hole and leave it a polygroup, which can be beneficial. If we go into our move brush, and then if you have a brush menu docked over here on the side, you can double click these little side pieces here, these little dividers to open them up. I'm going to go to brush, and I'm going to drag the brush menu over here. I'm going to go to auto masking, and if you turn mask by polygroups up to 100, whatever you start sculpting on first, so if I go into the clay brush here and start sculpting, let's go ahead and turn off polyframe, you're going to see it only is going to affect the first polygroup that you touch. So if I start sculpting here, it's only going to affect this polygroup. You can use this to your advantage using any brush, because this is a global setting here. So I can go to my move brush, and I can actually move these things around. Now, why I might be inclined to use polygroup masking is because I don't really want to change or damage anything that's going on in our original scan. I just want to update these areas here to make sure they're just a little bit more accurate and fit in a little bit better in the areas where the cameras, I didn't quite get enough photographs to get this information in here. So again, I'm going to go into my clay brush here with that option turned on, and also feel free to use your move brush. And now I'm just going to kind of fill this out, and you can hold down Shift and smooth. And again, as long as you start smoothing in that original polygroup, it's not going to mess up anything on your original scan. Now, you don't have to be that careful if you don't want to. It's not like we have a super amount of detail in here. So if you wanted to turn mask by polygroups down to 0, and you can actually turn it to 50% if you want to do like half and half, but you know, usually I do it on or off. You can certainly dial that back a little bit. And while you're working, you can go ahead and control drag. That'll re-Dynamesh your mesh here. We're getting a little bit thin, so I'm going to go ahead and smooth these areas out. And if you turn off solo again, you're going to see where this head fits in. And if I wanted to put a hole there, you could see it would be a little bit easier for me just to go in here and kind of, let's turn off mask by polygroups down to 0. I could go ahead and just move this up, or even better, go through here, Control Shift, and maybe clip curve, and then double tap and clip this back. But I'm going to go ahead and leave that filled in. In fact, what I'm going to do is go into inflate. I'm going to inflate this up just a little bit down here. Let's turn our mask by polygroups back up to 100 here. And I'm going to go back in here with my clay brush and kind of build this out just a little bit. Again, go out of solo mode. This is where it basically attaches to our body. And when we Dynamesh this back together, these will Dynamesh together again. And I'm not too concerned about these areas in here being perfect. It's more about what's going on under her chin and with her hands. So next we'll move on to the arms here. I'm going to Alt-Tap this one. And again, if we go down here to Dynamesh here, I'm going to turn off blur, turn Dynamesh on. And that'll go ahead and fill my holes for me. If you didn't want it to automatically fill your holes, you can go to Geometry, Modify Topology, run a close holes operation. That'll go ahead and fill your holes like this, and now you can go back in with your clay brush or even with your move brush, and you can go through here. Go ahead and move these out a little bit. If you wanted to isolate just one of these, you can hold down Control Shift, isolate these polygroups, and then go over to your polygroups menu, do an auto groups, and then anything that's not vertweld is going to get its own polygroup. And then you can go here, you can hit W, Control tap this polygroup here to go ahead and isolate it, and then you can even scale this in if you want to go ahead and get rid of some of the thinness around there. So we got that. We go ahead and Control drag to unmask everything, turn off polyframe if you want to, and then if you Control drag again, that'll go ahead and Dynamesh your object. Now, before you do that, I would go back to your Dynamesh settings, make sure blur is down to 0, and then Control drag to re-Dynamesh. Now that we have that, we can go into solo mode here, and we can see what we need to clean up. So now that this is separated off, I can go into my Clip Curve tool, hold down Control Shift, grab Clip Curve, and then hold down Control Shift again, and then when you drag out that Clip Curve line, you can hold down Space Bar to move it around, and then when you double tap your Alt key, that'll give you a hard transition. If you single tap the Alt key, that'll give you a Bezier transition. Then again, space bar to move that around. And when you let go, it's going to pull that geometry straight back to that gradient line. So now you can go through here and use clipping. You can use your clay brush. You can use smooth. And you can see this arm's a little bit flattened out. So again, use that clay brush in here to go ahead and isolate these. And in this one, we don't have a polygroup for where the camera couldn't quite get, but we do have a polygroup for this one. So I'm going to keep mask by polygroups up. And I'm just going to have to be careful that I only go in here and sculpt and modify things that the camera or that reality capture couldn't accurately capture, and don't get too overzealous, because I'm going to end up transferring these textures back onto my new mesh, and if I put in a whole lot of new geometry or modify the geometry that's there, it might do something weird. So I'm going to try and keep it, just rounding these shapes off a little bit. You're also going to see as I'm smoothing and adding geometry in here, I'm not getting that noisy texture in here. So let's talk about that a little bit. There's a couple different ways you can add that. In the brush itself, we have the clay brush selected. If you go into the brush menu settings over here, and if you don't have that docked, you can just double click to open up the side docking menu here, and then take your brush menu and just grab this little ball and drag it over. You can go over here to surface, and you can turn on noise. Now, this is going to give you a preview of what your surface noise is going to look like when you sculpt. I'm going to go ahead and let's increase that strength here, and then also that noise scale. We can go ahead and scale that up. And then if you want to change the look of this noise, you can just grab this curve. You can add a point just by clicking on it. Click on it to add another point, and you can see it's going to modify and change that noise. Now, this is different than surface noise. This is a surface noise within a brush. I'm going to go ahead and reset that. This is good enough for me, so I'm going to hit OK. And now with that noise turned on my brush, as I'm using this brush, you're going to see it starts getting a little bit noisy. So you can kind of add surface noise as you sculpt and try and match that surface noise up. If you want to add surface noise independent from your brush, what you can do is we can go ahead and turn that off. You can go over here to our surface noise, and now this is going to be surface noise applied to our entire object. So again, we can go in here, change our strength, change our noise scale here, say that's good enough, and if I hit OK, our surface noise applied to our entire object, which we don't necessarily want to do. We want to isolate it to just places where we want it to go. So some of the places we might want it to go is our polygroups over here. So if I hold down Control Shift, let's turn on our polyframe over here. We'll switch back to select rectangle. I can now hold down Control Shift and tap the original scan areas, Control Shift drag to isolate these polygroup areas. So using our visibility, if I hold down Control and tap, that'll mask out this area. Of course, you can go into your masking menu and say mask all with whatever's visible, and it'll go ahead and do that, but I like using the shortcuts here. So now if I hold down Control Shift and tap, that'll bring our visibility back, and you're going to see if I turn off polyframe that our noise is only, our surface noise here, if I turn that on and off, is only being applied to the areas that are unmasked. So if I want to go through here and say, oh, you know what, I want surface noise in these areas, just simply unmask it, and now surface noise will show up in those unmasked areas. Now, this is just a displacement preview, so if I turn off, we want to view our mask. If we turn off surface noise, you're going to see it just disappears and reappears. If you want to actually apply that to your mesh, go down here to the Apply to Mesh button, hit that, and that'll apply that surface noise to your mesh that way. So a couple different ways to get your surface noise back. I'm not going to worry too much about that. And there's also ways where you can use the maps generated to apply noise to your geometry later. We're keeping this simple, but those are just a few simple, easy ways to apply noise to your mesh, either as you sculpt or after you're done sculpting.